and the date is June 23, 1998. And perhaps you could begin by just telling me where and when you were born.
I was born in North Adams, and at the North Adams Hospital, and I lived on Pleasant Street, 140 Pleasant Street, all my single days, and then I moved up here on Chase Hill when I got married.
And who were your parents?
Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Shapiro. My mother was Annie Cronick. So I was a member of two large Jewish families in North Adams, the Cronicks and the Shapiros.
The connection with Gene Wine, right?
Yeah,
He's
right. Yeah, because his grandmother and my mother were sisters.
And, okay, now, can you tell me, were your parents, the Shapiros, were they born here?
Oh,
Did
no.
They come here
No, they came from Europe, yes. They came from Eastern Europe. And my father arrived in Boston, and my mother arrived at Ellis Island. She came when she was about 12 with her two sisters and her parents. But her brothers, older brothers, had come earlier, and so they knew where they were coming when they came.
And where in Eastern Europe did they come from?
Lithuania, you know. Sometimes it was Russia, sometimes it was Poland. But between Minsk and Vilna, Volozhin, we've traced it to.
Did they tell you anything about your mother? You said she was 12, right?
Yeah,
she would have remembered.
Yeah, but they never talked about it, no. We surmised they were all dairy farmers when they came, before they came, but they never talked much about it, which is a regret of mine. Yeah. But I've heard from people that they just, the boat trip was so horrible they didn't want to talk about it, and living was not too good over there. So I feel that they probably just pushed it out of their memories.
So, your father came to Boston, your mother to Ellis Island, and you said something, I think, about how they made their way here, or perhaps you didn't. How did they end up here in North Adams?
Well, my mother's family had relatives here. My mother had older brothers who settled here and came here. My father, I guess he had brothers here too before he came. And they met in North Adams. I think my father boarded in my mother's house, my mother's parents' house, which was near the synagogue, because that's where they all settled, near the synagogue. And I've even been pointed out the actual house that they lived in, which was near the synagogue.
What was the attraction? What do you suppose the attraction for so many Jewish families was here, way out in the northern Berkshires?
Well, as I understand it, one came to Troy or Albany, and he was a tailor, and they needed a tailor in North Adams, and so.
Okay, now you were telling me something about a Jewish tailor in Troy.
Yeah, well, I think that that's how the first member came here, because I guess they needed a tailor in North Adams, and he came here, and the rest, the people just follow, and members of the family follow that way.
There were, I guess, one of the reasons, I suppose, that there was a need for a tailor was that there were so many of these different mills here, right? Were Jews connected with those mills in any capacity other than serving as, owning retail businesses?
No, I don't know of any actually in the textile factories, no. But they had mostly businesses. The Jewish families I know had businesses. My father was an automobile dealer, but he started with horses. And no, he started with shoes. That's right, because we do have shoe factories. We had Wall Streeter. So my father started in the shoe business. And actually, I found out how it happened because he lost a brother in 1902 who had his own little shoe factory, shoe business on Union Street. And when my father came over at the age of 20, he worked with him. And then his brother died when he was about 22 years old. And my father, I think, that's how he acquired the shoe business. Because just by following their dates, I was able to discover that fact. And so he started the shoe business on Union Street. And when he and my mother got married, they lived upstairs over Quinn's on Union Street, Quinn's Wallpaper. Mm-hmm. They lived upstairs there. And the story goes, my father would look out the window, he'd see somebody go in the store, he'd run down, at lunchtime, and the guy wanted shoestrings or something, So from there, my oldest sister tells me that she remembers my father would have a horse. He'd have a beautiful horse, and he would tie it up in back of the shoe store. And a man would come along and see that horse and offer to buy it. My father would sell him the horse, so he'd buy another horse. And so he went from the shoe business into the horse business. And from there, he went into the automobile business. So my brothers always joked that the natural procedure would be for them to go into the airplane business, but they never did.
Do you know anything about where these horses came from?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so maybe
Yeah,
tell me.
I sure do. They came from out west. I don't know about the actual horse when my father had the shoe business, but when he got into the actual horse business, my mother had a brother out in Sioux City, Iowa, and he dealt, I guess, with horses, and my father would order horses from him, and the horses would come in by train, and the story goes my father would march them up Main Street, get off the train and march them up Main Street, and he had his place on Union Street. I can remember a barn where the horses were kept, and the story goes, and Eugene could have told you this story, is that this one man, my uncle who lived in Sioux City, had this, I think he was a nephew, I'm not sure, but he came with the horses one day, and my father didn't have too much money to pay him, so he said, I'll pay you in a different way, and he got him a date, and he married her, and he stayed here. That's how the story goes anyway. But we used to have these real beautiful Western horses. My father had these Western horses that were branded, when they came in. I don't remember them coming down Main Street marching in. I do know that my father always liked horses, and I grew up owning my own horse. So that was a wonderful part of childhood that I had.
Did you have, you had to have space for these horses, but you lived in town.
Yeah, well, what I remember the barn where he kept the horses that he was trading. But eventually he bought there was a barn and land where Morrison's business on South Church Street. I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, I know very little about that.
Yeah, I can't think of what that business is right now, but it's a big plant down there on South Church Street, and that's where, before that plant was built, that's where my father had a barn and owned the land. And haying, I can remember my brothers helping to hay and put hay in the barn and then he went into, of course, the cow business, because by this time he was selling cars, and a farmer would need a truck, and he didn't have the money for the truck, but he could give my father cows. And my father would buy the cows, and then he'd go to a farm, and he'd sell the cows. And he traded that way. I remember driving him to different farms to look at the truck or to buy the cows or the horses.
Was there a lot of, I wonder if there was a lot of haggling? Do you remember that being a feature? The price,
Well, I guess they never had any set prices, so they would discuss price, I'm sure, yeah. But I think my father is, if you were to go to the Registry of Deeds and look up the deeds under my father, you would see so many, because he would buy these farms, or he'd buy, it would have to be land and buildings, and sell them. One big deal I remember hearing talk about is that he bought a farm that day, and that very afternoon he sold it. So, I think he sold it to somebody nearby, as a matter of fact. That's what makes it a story. But I think the registry told me that story. Yeah.
Was he one of many such people in the community who did this sort of, I don't know if it's speculating, or I guess it's not really speculating, but trading, or was
no, there weren't. No, when it comes to, it was his specialty. In fact, he started financing cars. I think he was one of the first people to start financing on his own without, the banks. He would finance the cars that people bought. And, he built up a business that way, and that probably is what made him, it helped him a great deal.
Maybe you can tell a little bit about your mother and her story.
Well, everybody says their mother's remarkable. My mother was a remarkable woman. She was a homemaker, and she had 7 children. The oldest one died when he was about 9. But there were 6 of us growing up, so of course she cooked and baked, and everybody could bring people home, and it never fazed her. We could all bring friends home, and she always had food enough, and always had a lot of people around the table. It was a wonderful life. And yet she was very active in our sisterhood, in our synagogue, and Hadassah. She was active in it. And what can I tell you? She was Aunt Annie to everybody in North Adams. Everybody felt that close to her, that she was known as Aunt Annie to everybody.
You mentioned food,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wondering if you remember particular foods that she prepared. Any of the traditional Eastern.
Well, the traditional foods.
Jewish foods.
Yeah, traditional. Chicken soup with the matzo balls. We'd call them kanedalach. Noodle pudding we call lakshenkugel. Potato latkes, potato pancakes, all the traditional foods. We had them all.
Now, were there recipes that she used that she passed on to you? Do you make your latkes the way that your mother made them?
That's a good question, because my mother couldn't give us a recipe. It was, when it felt right, you use that much flour. So when it just looks right or feels right, that's it. So it was difficult to get recipes exactly from her. But I do make the traditional foods. I used to, not so much now. Did I use her recipes? Not particularly, probably. Because when I make a brisket, today, she would fry the onions and peel the carrots to give it all that flavor and everything. And nowadays, I open a can of cranberry sauce, whole cranberry sauce, and use the onion soup mix and put it over the brisket and put it in the oven, and it's wonderful. So you're right, I don't do it the way she did it, because she put more effort into it.
What were the kinds of things that held the Jewish community, to the extent that such a community existed, together? Were there I guess on different festivals of the year? What were the kinds of activities that people
Our
did?
synagogue, I would say, was the center of everything. We all belonged to it. On the high holidays, we all went to synagogue for the holidays. And Hebrew school was a big part of it. Of course, I didn't go. I was one of the youngest of 6, and a girl. So it wasn't so important for me to go. But my sister went, my middle sister, she was bar mitzvahed, and my 3 brothers were bar mitzvahed. It was the center of all our life. And even when I got married, it was a social center of our life to a great extent. We had the bridge parties, the dances, we ran everything. Today, there's nothing. But we used to have a huge social life attached to the synagogue.
Now, at the time that you were growing up, where was the synagogue?
Oh, the Center Street.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was our synagogue. I do remember when this one was built, about 36 years ago. Yeah.
You mean the current
new one, yeah.
The one that the college is
Yeah.
about to buy. Or
Right.
has bought. Yeah. Now, did Jewish families pretty much restrict their social life to gatherings with other Jewish families, or was that not necessarily the case in your experience?
No, I think that we did. Our social life was with the synagogue, I would say. But as a youngster, when I was growing up in grammar school and in high school, I belonged to the Lingernot Girls Club. I mean, there was a group of 8 of us. I was the only Jewish girl in the group. But we had our club, and we had our meetings, and we met at different homes, and it was very social. We had parties, and that was very pleasant. And did I have Jewish friends then? Well, I didn't go to Hebrew school. There weren't that many Jewish kids in my class. So I guess I didn't really have that many Jewish friends.
So it didn't make a whole lot of difference.
No, it made no
really.
difference, yeah. Never thought about it, actually. Except when it came to a dance, actually dating. It was very important to my parents that I date a Jewish boy. So that when it came to Drury Prom, I had to import a boy from Pittsfield. My first date was the junior prom because I was chairman of the prom. And so I had to have a date, and so I got a very nice boy my brother knew from Pittsfield. That was my first date.
But other than that, kids in the school
Oh, yeah.
visit each other's homes. There was...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, walk home from school with Ann Worthy, and my mother would always have milk and cookies for us, so she lived further up the street than I did, so we'd stop at my house. And to this day, she calls me. She lives on the Cape, and I still hear from Ann Worthy Castle. Yeah, about once a year she'll call me because she knew I liked to dance, and so she'd see Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers on the television. She'd call me up. That would be her impetus to call me, and we'd talk. But really, about once a year, I hear from her still. That's a long time.
Let's see. I guess I'd be interested to know, as you grew up in this town, what kinds of stories people told, let's say, about different places in the town. I mean, was there anything like that? Did people, I know for instance, not in the town, but outside, you had the Hoosac Tunnel, and there are all kinds of rumors about ghosts and that kind of. I mean, is that something that you grew up ever hearing about that, or any other things like that?
Not that I can think of, really. No.
Somebody else mentioned to me, for instance, a place called, Money Rock in Clarksburg. There was supposed to be some buried treasure.
No, I don't know about
about
that.
that?
No, I wasn't that adventuresome, I guess. That wasn't in my... I didn't know about that.
What about the other thing? What was it? Coca-Cola?
Coca-Cola Ledge?
Yeah, tell me about that. What
Well,
do you know, or do you remember?
The only thing I know about Coca-Cola Ledge is that state college students would always go up there and either leave a write on it or something. That's all I know about
And
it.
how do you know how it came to be
I've never-
Coca-Cola Ledge?
Oh, no. I think I've heard about it, but I can't remember.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I've always wondered how they approached it. I've never seen, the road or anything of how to approach the Coca-Cola ledge. But yeah, it was always talked about. There was always some escapade up there.
Maybe we can go back to your father. How did he get moved from horses to cars? Do you remember that transition? What that was like?
No, I don't remember it. My older sister probably remembers, but he must have bought a car, and was able to sell it, just like the horses, I imagine. But I don't really know that because that was early. I was probably just born when he went into cars. Because I only remember him having the business down on Union Street, the automobile business. But it was good business with 6 kids getting their license. It was very nice that our father had an automobile business.
And is that what happened with that? I mean, is that business still? Is it in other hands now?
Oh, Gateway. It's Gateway.
It's the same,
yeah,
same place.
Down there. Yeah. Well, it was actually where Aubuchon's. Aubuchon's is gone now, isn't it? No.
I think there's a building.
Yeah,
that's
Aubuchon's,
labeled
right?
Aubuchon's anyway.
Yeah. Well, it was in there that my father first had his business, and part of it's torn down. And then when my brothers got into it, they bought what is now Gateway. And they had it for many, many years, but now my brother's retired. One brother died. My one brother retired from it. And my oldest brother had a place in Pittsfield, automobile dealership. He's retired.
If anything occurs to you that you want to tell me about, you should just go right ahead because it's not as though you need to stick to a subject.
Yeah, right. Well, it's just that I think you're interested in the Jewish community. It's gotten smaller now, much smaller, and we don't know what's going to happen. It will be rather exciting to see which way we turn. We were Orthodox, at the beginning. And then when we built the new synagogue, we converted to conservative. And it'll be interesting to see now if they go Reformed. Most of the young Williamstown people probably want to go Reformed.
Yeah, I think
Eugene might have
was
mentioned
saying something to me about,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, that it will probably end up being in Williamstown as
Right.
opposed to here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the families left, I guess. Is that, how do you explain the waning?
The young people went away, a lot of them. The old people moved to Florida and either lived there or died there. So actually in North Adams, I can count on my fingers almost how many people, senior citizens here are left. And there aren't that many young people in North Adams per se, because they would be in mostly in Williamstown or Pittsfield.
Why do you suppose, this is, I guess there could be any number of interpretations, but why do you suppose it was the young Jewish people that left, whereas a lot of these other families stayed here?
I don't know. A lot of them went off to college, and they see wider horizons. That may have been one of the reasons.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't mind my asking, why did you stay? Why are you...
Oh, I left. Oh, yeah, I left. I got out of college. Oh, the war was on. And I came home. But I wanted to... I got into the Red Cross. Yeah, just before the war ended, I got into Red Cross. So I was at Fort Dix, and also at on the Cape, Camp Edwards. And I was a recreation worker. I wasn't brave enough to go overseas. I didn't sign up for overseas. And then when I got out of Red Cross, oh, well, I'm not going to tell you all my escapades, but I was away for about 10 years. And then when I got married, we decided we were going to live in Troy or Albany. And then my father offered us Chase Hill, and it just seemed a good place.
Had he been living in this house, or
No, he had bought it.
Uh-huh.
Just like he was buying properties, and so he bought it, I think, hoping that one of his kids would live here. And so I feel very good that I gave him a few years of happiness, because I think he really enjoyed having me living here, rather than out of town someplace. And it was great. I brought up 3 children here, so it was a great place. I think North Adams is great for bringing up children. And it's a nice life. I lead a good life here.
Now, is Chase Hill, is that the name of the house? Obviously,
It's the property.
Hill,
Yeah, it's the property.
How did that, what's
George
the story
Chase.
of this place?
George Chase, you got my paper up at State College. I took a local history course with Dan Connerton years ago. And so for my paper, I wrote on George Chase and Chase Hill. So actually, I did a great deal of research and enjoyed doing it. Got an A on my paper, and I always tell Dan I didn't deserve it, because now I find more and more things I want to add to it that I should have had in the paper. And I didn't do that about my own house on Pleasant Street, where I was born and brought up.
Since you're on the subject, tell me, so who was George Chase?
George Chase, one of my favorite subjects. George Chase started out as a clerk in the Sampson Shoe Factory. And when he was about 19, the workers struck, St. Nicholas or something, where the union, they went on strike. And so George Chase, Calvin Sampson asked George, he was the president of Sampson Shoe Factory, he asked George Chase at the age of 19 to go out to California and bring back Chinese workers, which he did. He brought back 75 Chinese workers. And the story goes that Sampson went to Williamstown, and when the train was coming in, he got on the train in Williamstown with 2 guns in a holster. And when they arrived in North Adams, of course, he expected trouble from the people who had gone on strike. And so he gets off the train first with his 2 guns, and he brings the Chinese workers. And the Sampson Shoe Factory was right down here. And from this window, George Chase could look down, because later on he becomes president of Sampson Shoe Factory. So he could look right down, and I have a blueprint of the factory. It was a shoe factory. And I have a blueprint where he housed the Chinese to sleep and eat in there, because it was too dangerous for them to go out. And so eventually George Chase worked his way up to treasurer, and then he became president. And he lived on Chase Hill. And he brought up his family. He had 4 children. And he was a leading citizen. He was on the board for the YMCA in North Adams, and he belonged to the Congregational Church. And he was a deacon and a leading citizen there. So that's Chase Hill.
Now, did the house pass from his family's hands to your father's hands?
No, not directly. No. Then there was the Gallup. Is it Harvey Gallup? He had something to do with the Arnold Print Works. I think he was one of the owners. And he bought Chase Hill for his daughter, Dorothy, who was married to Sam Jones. The story goes that Sam Jones was a poor boy, and they sent him to Europe to be educated and come back with a doctorate or something, I think. And so his daughter Dorothy was married to Sam Jones. And the Jones division in Adams, which was part of the Arnold Print Works, is named after this Sam Jones. Mm-hmm. And after Jones, there was the Adams family that lived here. And then I think my father got it after that. 1943 he bought it.
I take it that, not just here, in a lot of these industrial towns, the industrialists lived in houses like this on hills, whereas you described they could look down.
Yeah.
Are there other homes? What are other homes in town come to mind that they sort of fit that description?
Oh, well, H.B. Clark, but it wasn't up on a hill, but it was very palatial looking. And that's where our synagogue was built, the new one. That was palatial looking. And of course, the Masonic Temple was palatial. That was the home, I think, of A.C. Houghton. And the library was built, I think, for Blackington. And so, yeah, these are the big homes. But, and George, I have a map of 1887 that shows where George Chase owned all the land on Bracewell Avenue and Chase Avenue, and they were just lots, and they were all numbered in the map, numbered lots that he sold off. So I remember talking to a Mr. Deming down here at the bottom of the hill here, and he told me how he would shovel a stairway down in the front here for Mr. Chase, and he would shovel all the way up and he'd get to the top, and there'd be a quarter at the top for Mr. Dem before he went to school. And yeah, he told me about the Chases, because he said he came up here with his parents when he was a little boy, when one of the Chase sons was killed out west, and they came up to pay a condolence call. And he described Mr. Chase as very stern and short, and Mrs. Chase was taller. That's all I remember.
What do you remember from just, I guess it would just be observation or hearing things about relations between the mill workers, let's call them, and the mill owners? I mean, what was that? What's
That's
the labor
before my
situation?
time. That's before my time, you see. The Arnold Print Works is before my time. Then it came Sprague's. And I remember all the, Sprague employed everybody, 4,000 workers, I think.
But in your time, there was no, for example, there's no union activity, that kind of thing.
Yes, I remember the union strike at Sprague, and that's why Sprague pulled out. But that's in my time. I don't remember the textiles, Windsor Print Works and Arnold Print Works. No, that was before me. I'm old, but not that old.
Yeah, and I just don't know enough about the.
Yeah.
The
Well,
dates.
Sprague's probably started when I was a child, but I wasn't really conscious of all the details. Yeah.
I guess there's not really only one other thing I was going to ask you, which takes us back again to your, either your father and your mother. You say they didn't talk about the old country per se. Did they talk at all about their parents?
Oh, I knew
tell
my mother's
stories
parents.
Oh, you knew them?
Oh, I knew my mother's parents. She came with them from Europe. My father's parents stayed over there. My father's, some of his family was lost in the Holocaust, because my father had a sister who didn't come, and she had children and grandchildren. And I have a picture of one boy that my father, when things were getting tough over there, my father tried to adopt through the Red Cross, but it was too late. They were all lost in the Holocaust. But what did I start to tell you about that? What was
So
the
you were starting to tell me about the grandparent that you knew.
Oh, yeah, so I knew my mother's mother, Gertrude, and her husband was Moses Chronic, who died. He's buried up at our Jewish cemetery, also with my grandmother, but she went to Chicago and remarried. And she used to come in the summers and stay with us from Chicago, so I remember her. She died when I was 13, so I do remember. But I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. We were up at camp. We had a cottage up in Windsor Pond. And in those days, we were considered too young to go, but I remember when she died in the summer.
Did these people in the older generations, did these people speak English or Yiddish or both? Or what?
Well, we spoke English. But when they wanted to keep something, Yiddish, I love the Yiddish expressions. I just love some of the words that we would hear. Are you Jewish?
Yeah.
Well.
But in my case, there was no Yiddish spoken in my family.
Yeah,
so
well,
I'm not
I loved it. When my brother got into looking for cookies, my mother, I remember the expression "geh weg from dan," and I just love these little expressions.
What does that mean?
And go away from there, get away from there, geh weg. It's very Yiddish. Sometimes you can almost guess what it means in English. Geh weg from dan. No, I still today love to hear the Jewish expressions, and
what other
Yiddish?
What other ones come to mind? Ones that would be too obscure for me to know. To say
it's funny how some of these expressions will come to my mind when I don't even know it or expect it, because I never learned Yiddish. I never spoke it, and then of course my folks also spoke Polish, and that was the big joke. If they really didn't want us to know what they were saying, they spoke Polish, because I guess that's what they spoke over there, besides Yiddish. Other expressions in Yiddish?
Ones that you find yourself thinking or
well, when it
saying.
comes to food, I told you, I love to say Luxenkugel instead of noodle pudding. It hurts me to say noodle pudding when it's Luxenkugel, and it's Kanelach, and it's blintzes. Blintzes are the cheese blintzes. Yeah, well, that's they use now anyway. I can't think of any right now. I know this is ticking along, so I can't think of any. But if I do, I'll stop.
Okay, and I guess the other thing I was going to ask related was, this is kind of a difficult question to articulate, but what do you see as values, and I guess I mean sort of specifically Jewish values, having been passed on to you from your parents?
Oh, definitely. My father brought us up he always believed you tell the truth. Then you don't have to worry about remember, what did I say, If you tell the truth, there's no doubt in your mind about what you have to say. So he believed strongly in that, and we got that. Also, behave yourself. What will the neighbors say? I think that's strongly strong in a Jewish upbringing. Behave yourself. What will the neighbors say? Don't embarrass the family. I think we were brought up with that. That was a strong value. And having brothers and sisters, just wonderful. We're still. When we get together, 5 of us get together, we thank God every time. And we all live around here now. My older sister lived in New York for 60 years, got married and lived there. Finally, she's here in Sweetwood in Williamstown, as happy as can be with the mountains. And now we get together, and every time we get together, my youngest brother says, see what you'd be missing if you were still in New York? Because we'd call her up and say, oh, we all had lunch together today, So now we can all have lunch together, and we're very, very thankful, because there are 5 of us. And I'm next to the youngest, and I'm 77, so we're very lucky that we can get together. And we're still good friends. And you don't find that. I know my brother would bring home his fraternity brothers from school, and they were always amazed, that we were all so friendly and so good to each other, because some families aren't like that, I guess. I'm sure they aren't. So we're lucky. So I guess we got good values.
And these are your
Those are my kids.
Your kids and grandkids, I think.
No, I have no grandkids. These are my kids.
Those are just
Kenny at 5 years of age, and Karen at 5 years, and Tommy at 5 years. My mother believed that she always had all of us at the age of 6 months. So we have that all framed. And then she took all of us at the age of, is it 5 years or 2 years? I lose track.
That looks like about 5.
Yeah. So I guess she had all of us at 6 months and at 5 years, and then she had all of us high school graduation, all of us in one frame, ovals. And then she finally had all of us as college graduates. So we're proud of that. So I had the 5.
So there's maybe not a value, but a little practice passed on. In other words, the photos of your kids are arranged more or less the same.
We all
age.
took our kids at 6 months. I think my mother had us, all of us at 6 months, the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 years that we gave my mother. Yeah. And then somebody, just to be funny, put the dogs in a frame. The ones of us who had dogs put the dogs in a frame, just like we had the kids in a frame. Yeah.
Our